Welcome to the Stop Doing Stupid Stuff podcast. Today, hosts Tim Keefe and Andreas Wieman tackle a Business Insider article by Dominick Reuter that exposes AT&T's controversial employee tracking system in their episode, Beyond Coffee Badging, When Presence Tracking Becomes the Problem. The telecommunications giant has been using presence reports to identify so-called freeloaders among their 140,000 employees, monitoring everything from badge swipes to workstation logins in their push for a strict 5-day, 40-hour office mandate. What started as an attempt to combat coffee badging, where employees briefly show up for coffee before leaving, has spiraled into a system that AT&T now admits is driving workers to frustration. Tim brings unique insight to this discussion, having previously worked at a Bell operating company alongside current AT&T CEO John Stankey. Together, Tim and Andreas dissect why this approach represents everything wrong with modern management thinking, focusing on presence over performance, applying lazy solutions to complex workforce challenges, and completely missing the generational shift happening in today's workplace. They'll explore the critical difference between exempt and non-exempt employees, why collaboration can't be mandated through physical proximity, and how companies like AT&T, ironically, sellers of virtual collaboration tools, are constraining their own talent pools. Get ready for a no-holds-barred critique of return-to-office policies that prioritize surveillance over results.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to another excellent, stellar, super interesting edition of the Stop Doing Stupid Stuff podcast, where we give away free advice for people to stop doing stupid stuff every single week, for the most part. So, Tim, what advice are we giving people to knock off doing stupid stuff this week?
Well, if nothing else, I like the way you preempt the ratings afterwards. But so if anybody thought it wasn't stellar, or don't bother to rate it. I guess that's the way I was going with that. Anyway, thanks. And Andreas, as always, it's a lot of fun to get together. Hey, and we're getting to that virtually, by the way, which is essential to the article we're about to discuss. But Dominick Reuter wrote a really good article. It was published on the 12th, September 12th in the Business Insider. And the title of this is fascinating. AT&T tracked employee attendance to find quote unquote freeloaders. Now it admits the system is driving workers to the brink of frustration. So really interesting article. And I used to work at one of the Bell operating companies. In fact, I actually worked with John Stankey, who's currently the CEO of AT&T for a while. And John is a very strong guy, and he's done a great job. He's had a very successful career. But on this one, I think I have maybe a little bit of a disagreement, but I also understand that they've got a 140,000 employee company that he's trying to manage. But here's what the article says, that they were using a presence report to track people's time in the office. And the presence report was supposed to, and they don't really describe what inputs were in the presence report, but part of it were things like badging in, badging out, probably time logged in to a workstation or a desktop that was at a fixed IP address within the office. And I think what they're doing is taking freeloader is their version of the quiet quitter. But they were pretty extreme about it. And they said they had samples. They didn't say how many of people that were like just doing coffee badging, which we've talked about in the past. People come in, swipe the badge so they get credit for the day, have a cup of coffee and head out. And in some ways, they're actually doing more collaboration in those coffee badging days than they would normally, because they are there just to have coffee. So they go find somebody to sit down and chit chat about what's going on, and probably getting more engaged with some of the other things in the office. But that's not the goal. And a big part of this was they have a mandate for 5 days in the office, 40 hours a week. They do call out that this was targeted at salaried employees. So I'm assuming that means exempt employees. And this had nothing to do with the non-exempt staff, many of whom are also represented, which is, a different set of challenges. But at least for those people that fell into the exempt categories, this was, a big part of their focus. So some of that gets really interesting too, because when you start thinking about exempt and what that means, you wonder, are we also doing the right things in terms of defining, what are exempt employees? And I don't know if you've had to deal with this, but I've had to go through this a couple of times in my career. But one of the things that's really important is defining, and people go, well, why does it matter? And it's, well, here's the thing. At least as long as we're complying with the Fair Labor Standards Act, you are either exempt or non-exempt. Non-exempt are the people that are, in other words, not exempt from the labor laws. They are entitled to overtime and generally limited to 40 hours a week. If they work over 40 hours a week, they get additional pay. And they may, depending on where they work, what state, there may be other requirements associated with that. Now, a lot of companies, in order to avoid having to comply with overtime regulations, and this is really very common in technology, they go ahead and make everybody non-exempt. And or they don't declare anything and act as if everybody is exempt and treat everybody as if they're exempt even without a formal declaration. So exempt means, I'm just going to read some here, that they are exempt from overtime pay requirements. And the general category of what that means is they're either executives, which is defined as managing a department, supervising 2 or more employees, and having the authority to hire or fire. Administrative, performing work that requires specialized knowledge and exercising discretion and independent judgment in business operations. Or professional. And professional is work that is primarily intellectual, specialized, and requires advanced knowledge, such as in teaching, law, or medicine. Okay. So
Yeah. So they're stretching the definition and making as many people exempt as possible. I mean,
as
that's what they're doing.
yeah, as many companies do. And the companies that, have done this because they are compliant, without naming names, but, a close family member who, work, in the Gap family. Gap's really pretty strict on this. And so, for example, if you're a non-exempt team member, in other words, you're not one of those definitions that we just described there, you are not expected to log in after hours. You are not expected to log in during your lunch hour. In fact, they make it a point to make sure that you don't, because they don't want to run the risk on this. Anyway, kind of stepping back, and I think we are, probably diving down a little bit of a rabbit hole here. But I think the bigger picture is, regardless of whether I come into the office or not, what I didn't see in what they were looking at were what were the outcomes that they were measuring. I saw a statement of this: the intent of the return to office was to drive collaboration. I don't know that it's a very measurable business outcome or a business deliverable. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, you got to look at the outcomes though. What is the intent to collaborate? Usually when you collaborate, you can have unique viewpoints and you can problem solve a little bit faster with a higher degree of quality outcome. That's it. It's math. It's mathematical. But I would say, going back to the whole exempt versus non-exempt and kind of what AT&T is doing here and labeling this push for the exempt people in the office. I had a ton of exempt staff in my roles. And what I would always do, I would go to them and say, look, you got 40 hours a week to figure out how to do all of this stuff. Here are all of the service level agreements contractually that we have to hit. Here's our KPIs. Explain to me how you're going to do this in 40 hours. And I would do that with all of my teams at the supervisory level, and the management level and the senior management level, et cetera. And I would have them go look at it and say, look, we can't do this in 40 hours. And I would say, okay, well, what can we distribute to hourly workers? And then we divvy up and we kind of go from there. But it allowed me to get a realistic view because I had several different statements of work contracts that we had to maintain compliance with SLAs and KPI delivery. So I would have the teams problem solve without even telling them they're problem solving it, by the way, right? My whole thing was, look, you're salaried. You're going to get paid for 40 hours a week. That's what your salary is based off of, right? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, all right, cool. Tell me how you're going to do this in 40 hours. And uncovering just that simple kind of exercise uncovered how are we actually going to do this? What can I do? Help me make decisions and my management team make decisions with a little bit more agility and accuracy and who's going to be doing what. And it was just got a starting point, and then we iterated on there once we got it in motion. But it's to me this whole and I'm going to draw this back in so I don't go too far down the rabbit hole here. But the point is, regardless of if they're being exempt or non-exempt, I think people have gotten lazy. We've gotten so lazy and we followed this checklist for years and years and years that now that we're at a precipice where we have varying, I should say it like this, we have different variables with heavier weightings than a lot of us, including myself, have faced in our careers. of saying, oh, well, we've got this huge generational makeup of employees now, from baby boomers and Gen Xers like us going up to millennials and Gen Z, which is the majority of the workforce now. And then looking at it from analog to digital and mainly digital. And how do you have disparate distributed workforce teams working virtually versus working in office? So what you're seeing is a lot of people that were leaders in an era when working on premise, right, in the office was the thing to do, and they associate success with that because that's what they were a part of when it was successful. So the knee-jerk reaction is no more work from home, just come into the office. And you and I have talked about this before. There is certain roles that 100% need to be in the office. I 100% subscribe to that, but I look at that on a case by case basis, not on a knee-jerk reaction of, well, you're an exempt employee, Tim, so you need to be in the office. It's about what is the outcome that Tim, the person in this 144,000 company of AT&T, what is Tim's contribution and what is he going to be responsible for? That's what I need to make the judgment call on if he needs to be here or if he can be virtual, if he can be remote. Is it going to be safe and secure? Is his outcome that he's going to produce going to be viable and contributive to the collective whole of the 144,000 people in my organization? And I just think people are lazy. Whether you guys go look at this article, you talk about Amazon and JP Morgan and Microsoft, like tech heavyweights. AT&T is a huge telco heavyweight, and they have been since the bells, converged. They're all lazy. Like they're getting lazy with their approach to recruiting talent, training new talent, and figuring out how do you do knowledge transfer of people that have been in this industry like us for decades, and how do we knowledge transfer? Let me see if I can say that right to the younger generation so they can understand what we've been through and what we can pass on to them and they have a more
Right.
modernized look at how things are done. How can we incorporate that to ensure that the frameworks transfer but are updated for what we're seeing in the current day?
And I still find myself, as I completely acknowledge and agree with what you're saying. I still come back to the other thing, whether I go into the office and sit there and drink coffee all day for 8 hours instead of 10 minutes, or am I aligned with a set of deliverables that you've given me the tools and capability to be successful at achieving? Now, if you give me goals and objectives that I can't meet, like, are just absurd. Oh, we want you to grow your sales quota by 300%, and we're not going to do
That
anything
never
different.
happens. Sales
Well,
quotas never, they're always spot on accurate, by the way, for all
yeah,
of our
yeah.
sales listeners. You guys can agree with us, I'm sure.
Well, or even operational metrics. I mean, now I'm going to date myself and go back 1,000 years, but when I was working for the Bell Operating Company here in San Francisco, a big part of what I was held accountable to were what they called error codes. And these were associated with either customer complaints, trouble tickets, or automated alerts on circuit failures. And so the expectation was that we were managing to a certain level in there. And this is all tied back to a lot of the original Bell models about what were the accepted technical standards. Because I was an operating salespeople, I was running what they called a central office. Additionally, I was responsible for whatever 50 or 60 represented people, and actually, I was at different times in multiple offices across the city. So I'm not trying to say that all of these jobs are like that anymore, but I would be spending a fair amount of time, driving between locations or going to sales meetings because, it was always important when they got to the final sales pitch that the executive, or I wasn't an executive, but the manager who was going to be the local manager for the infrastructure should show up for the sales pitch. And, so I'd get dragged into sales meetings. And so I really spent very, very little time in the headquarters office downtown. And as a result, I would say most of my collaboration was either by phone or, meeting somebody in a coffee shop or getting together for lunch with the other first level supervisors and all of that kind of stuff. And I'm not, look, I get you got 140,000 people. There's like tens and thousands of those people, I guess, who are expected to go in the office and are working on financial projections, et cetera. Now, of course, those jobs are under a lot of stress. Well, not stress isn't probably the right answer, but they have new tools. AI tools that should hopefully allow those people to be, quote, more efficient in creating some of those analytics. Hey, what if this, what if that, putting together the various spreadsheets and data analytics that we use to manage. Oh, wait a minute, I'm sorry, did we use data to manage the business? I'm sorry. That doesn't happen very often, even today. But
Agreed.
um, but again, the point that I'm kind of rambling on here about is I still come back to collaboration in my mind is a very ill-defined thing. Some people do it naturally, some people are more extroverted or they've developed the skills that allow them to walk into a room and small talk and engage with people and learn what they're working on. And I could sit there and I could put a bunch of introverts in a room. They would all sit in the corners and nobody would talk to each other unless somebody creates an environment that, kind of brings that collaboration forward. And then what are they collaborating on? Oh, it's a brainstorming session. Well, then there should be some, structure around it. What are we trying to do here? Or it's a go-to-market strategy, or it's a accounts management, or it's a solving a technical problem. We're deploying a new technology. How are we going to train the technicians to resolve this? How are we going to manage reporting? How are
Well,
we going to deal with customer complaint? And
what
yada,
you're
yada,
ex
yada.
what you're explaining though, I think this is kind of important for everybody to understand. That's the start of it. That's one step, but now you're getting into the other steps that are what we consider the tactical steps. These are the
Right.
crucial things. If you want to put a strategy together, anybody can do strategy nowadays. Go mess around with any AI inference front end, and they'll spit out some BS strategy for you. The key, and this is where everybody is, I shouldn't say everybody, but I'm being a bit verbose here. Everybody's missing is the execution of the tactical components that in small increments add up to the strategy being achieved. So what you're saying is the collaboration is kind of the first step. You define the problem, you figure out, you solution process engineer the outcome that you're expecting with all of the groups that you're collaborating with, whether it's in an office or it's virtual. Well, let's just pause that for a moment and say that's what the collaboration is going to occur. But then the little steps that it takes to execute on those pieces that add up to that end outcome, we keep coming back to the outcome. That is the key that I think everybody is missing here, is that they're assuming, again, well, 1995, everything was in the office and I was promoted to senior regional vice president of the southeastern sector or whatever, stupid titles we had back then. And you're like, well, we were all in the office, so we all need
Mr.
to go back to
Mr.
the
Global
office.
Vice President. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah, we need to go back to the, well, it's not my fault. My company was like, hey, this guy's
No, I'm
doing pretty
giving you a
good.
hard
Let's give
time.
him let's
I'm
give him
giving you a
every
hard
we're
time.
gonna open up a contact center in Antarctica. Let's give it to Andreas. But no, but the false sense of, well, this is what got me to where I am. Oh, you know what? It got me to where I was 10 years ago, 15 years ago. I'm not going to sit back and be like, "Oh, let's do that thing that I did 15 years ago." I might take the framework of what got me there, but I got to look at
Yep.
what am I dealing with now? What is my team dealing with now? And how can I help
Well,
my team? And it shouldn't just be, "Oh, well, everybody was," this is my sarcastic voice. Everybody's in the office then. So let's just get everybody back to the office. And then magic happens. Magic just happens and stuff gets done.
well, I think you just nailed the kind of the key point is, and this has been the case for a long time. I mean, and this is pre-pandemic, right? There was a lot of this back and forth about why people should be in the office. And then we went to hoteling. Remember, oh, we're not going to have assigned desks. We're going to have flexibility. So you can come in and you take whatever seat is
So,
available. And
so
then,
look, Tim, I need you to commute in a couple hours of traffic every day. And you know what? I'm not even going to give you a spot where you can put up a picture of your family or whatever you want to be happy while you're there working. It's musical chairs. Just commute, get in here, and just be happy you have a job somewhere and you just figure out where you got to sit. That's a great formula, by the way. I've seen that in action, and that works great.
well, it is the formula. I mean, especially with the open office models, even more so. So to your point, you don't even have a fixed place. But you go back to a couple of things that you pointed out. First off, I think this needs to be about outcomes and the talent that delivers the outcomes rather than anything else. So if that talent and needs by the nature of their job or the way they operate wants to come to an office, and there are many people who like that. My daughter is one of those people. She kind of likes going to the office. It gets her away from her apartment. It gives her a place where she can separate her personal life and her professional life. And she likes the engagement because she's an outgoing person. She likes the engagement with her coworkers, and she that adds to her ability to meet her objectives.
Yep.
And for her, it's a 20-minute walk. All right,
Yeah.
so she's a little bit spoiled, not a little bit spoiled. She's very spoiled on this particular case. But Then you have other situations where, and they even brought it out in the article that, they're having trouble hiring AI staff because within the geos of where they have offices and office hubs, guess what? They're limiting, by the way you said it. If I mean that you have to come to the office 5 days a week, you're kind of limiting your talent pool to what, a 30-minute drive, an hour drive from that location.
Well, yeah, your
Oh,
recruiting
okay.
radii shrinks
Right.
tremendous.
So you have that problem. So now I'm constraining my talent pool. Oh, and also you have people that are going to say, well, wait a minute. And we have a client that you and I've worked with quite a bit recently, who many of their people were hired during the pandemic, have never worked in the office. Now they're being told that there's going to be an RTO mandate. And they're like, okay, who's paying for my commute? Who's paying for my childcare? And everybody on the other end is going, well, what do you mean? We never had to do that before. And you're like, well, these people have never had that experience. So you're essentially giving them a reduction in pay, and not insignificant reduction in pay, for them to do the same thing they're doing today, but now they have to come to an office and add 30 minutes to an hour on each end of commuting.
Well,
Um,
what they're doing, I want to dissect that really quick, but I do want to make one other comment that I think it'll resonate with us, but hopefully with the listeners as well. But if you think about the demographic that's starting to take over, millennials and Gen Zs, and the Gen Z is a population we're talking about specifically that through COVID, 5 years ago, when they were moving into virtualization, they were coming out of grad school, they were graduating, et cetera. And so to your point, they've never had a professional career, maybe even the end of their academic career in an actual physical space. And so if you look at, and I'm just talking generational data here, so anyone can pick apart my comments here if you want, but I'll just say, show me the data that says there's a bit more of an introverted aspect because of what they've faced in the time in their lives that is very impressionable. So they're used to expressing, not like we have a tool that also has the data that shows this, the younger generations express themselves in a more virtual manner, not an in-person manner, i.e., we have a tool, BalanceWise IQ, where our employees of the younger demographic are more comfortable expressing themselves in commentary through management feedback there than they are in person expressing the same views. So you have this younger group who a lot of them actually don't have children yet, so they're a cheaper resource. And you're saying, hey, I need you guys to come in to this office. You should have more flexibility. You're not married. You're single, and you don't have children, so you have less of an excuse to give me to not come into the office, right? And like statistically speaking, all valid points. If you're talking about a robot, not a human, by the way, but let's say right now decisions are not being made with the human factor being weighted appropriately here. So now you look at all those numbers, and so you have people again that were in leadership roles that were like, well, if we were in the office, we were successful, so everybody needs to go back to the office. We can make everybody exempt in this young generation, and now we're going to mandate they all come back. What everybody is missing in this whole quiet quitting trend and low productivity output trend in the return to office, you're not looking at the individual and you're not measuring their outcomes like you and I keep talking about, and what is their contribution, because do they feel more comfortable in an environment where they're around a bunch of other people, and what is that level of an anxiety that's being introduced that's impacting their productivity. If you look at it from a motivational psychology or group psychology standpoint, nobody is really measuring all of these factors. And the other thing, since I'm on a soapbox, I'm going to squeeze my comment in here. It's also in the article. It's really interesting. Kellen Kenny, who is the chief marketing and growth officer for AT&T, she announced that they're kind of pulling back and said their division is reducing reliance on presence tracking in response to employee concerns about the system and its accuracy. So we're sitting here preaching about making data-driven decisions, but you have data, quote unquote data that's coming in that you're making business decision and choices off of, presence tracking, that apparently the employees are like, this isn't even accurate, so I don't believe it. Like, I'm going to push back on it. Good for them for pushing back on it. So that way you have a good, healthy balance in challenging the data, and you have a mechanism in there for ensuring that it's
yeah.
actually accurate. But I think this is all really interesting in this move that's going on here. And now they're reverting back to, yeah, we're not going to do this so much right now because it kind of is blowing up in our faces.
Well, but at the same time, the CEO's memo and was a pretty strong statement.
Yep.
like it basically says if you don't want to be, you don't want to work in the office, then this, I'm paraphrasing here, but it's basically either comply or get out. They allow for a little bit of flexibility at a manager discretion level, but as a general premise, the expectation is you will come into an office, a minimum for exempt employees, 40 hours a week, but again, my point goes, whether you come into the office, you sit at home, it doesn't seem to matter. What matters, should matter, is what am I delivering? And, again, I think it's kind of interesting that here you have a telecommunications company, one of their big products is selling tools that enable virtual companies to work, things that they were selling for 20 years. Again, don't blame the pandemic. I can remember going into, the AT&T office in San Ramon, California, and you'd be like, everybody's sitting at their desk. What are they doing? They're on conference calls. But they had to come into the office
Yep.
to get on conference calls. Oh, and
Yep.
by the way, what is one of the big products that, at the time AT&T was selling was, oh, teleconferencing tools that your organization can work virtually. And, it's kind of like a little bit of, eating your own dog food type of thing, or taking advantage of or enabling your workforce. So I know we've gone long today, but it's a big topic for us. And I think, we're seeing this, still seeing this stuff comes up in, we had a client the other day was asking about tools to, track, people, are they at their workstation? And again, this is whether they're at their using their laptop wherever they are, but are using their company laptop during their workday. In other words, are they sleeping or taking a nap or whatever? And again, not about outcomes. It's just about a transaction, a checkbox. And I'm still going, okay, but what is the person's job? Now, and the reason I say that is, sometimes people's jobs, especially exempt, if you go by the definition, should allow for flexibility and discretion and how they get their work done. That's one of the reasons why they're exempt. That if they have to do, if they extend into the evening because they have to take a call with a client in another time zone, or they have to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning or 6 a.m. on a Sunday to do a podcast. Oh, wait a minute, that's us. Anyway, the point I'm making is that's a big part of the definition of the job, is allowing for discretion and independent judgment. So I'm struggling here. And I think that organizations need to have clarity of what are your objectives, what is the contract, what is the employment contract that I have with you to do what? In that what, there should be very clearly defined objectives that are measurable, not just sales quotas, but the things that make up your business. Are you expected to help with strategy, objectives, individual, staff development, compliance with a represented agreement? If there's a collective bargaining agreement, are you trained enough so that you can interact with your represented employees in a way that is, it complies with the contract and protects the company from, situations that result in, whether it's litigation, wrongful termination lawsuits, et cetera. And if you don't have that training and you don't have that support, again, what I'm trying to do is get back to what's the job and how do I measure the outcome of my job? And then do I have the support? Do I have the skills? Do I have access to the information I need to be able to perform that job? Now, if that requires that I have to be in an office to do that because, of some specific requirements, okay. And every company can make whatever decisions they make. I mean, AT&T has been very clear, which is better than some companies.
Yeah.
They've said, this is what we're going to do. And we recognize that by doing that, there are going to be people that aren't going to work here.
Right.
And good for them by doing that. But
Yep.
they also need to accept the fact that they're excluding people from their hiring pool. I mean, they can always put up satellite offices, which I think is their answer to that, which will help with that to some degree. But you're also run the risk of getting into a situation where people are going to feel that, I'm marching in step here rather than having the opportunity to use my brain.
Well, exactly. Autonomy.
And
And and the
anyway,
checklist. No, I agree. I think it's a good ending point to say anybody listening, figure out how you guys can work together. If you look at every metric, engagement is plummeting, right? Employee engagement. You're seeing middle management employee engagement plummet. And you're seeing, if you look at publicly traded companies and you look at their line items on their quarterly earnings, you can see that cost to deliver service is going up. Labor specifically is going up. All of that points back to decisions that is being driven by boards and C-suite.
Well,
And so collaborate together to problem solve and figure out exactly what Tim is talking about. How can you guys collaborate and problem solve for the current era that we're in right now? Not a prior era that you did something and that resulted in success. Use that as a framework, but figure out how to teach the younger generation how to problem solve and let them give you a lens that maybe you're not seeing right now. And guess what? Engagement goes up if people are engaged, like your daughter. She can find a way to go into the office and do something she's doing it voluntarily. She's not being forced. She's doing something that
well,
she made choices on that is a higher level of productive outcome because she's volunteering and she's excited and she's engaged to do it. Use that as
well,
the starting point.
and that company does have a return to office mandate, but for her it works, and I just want to be clear about that. But I do think the bigger thing here goes back to, regardless of, and we've said this before, whether you're in a return to office, whether you're in a hybrid model, whether you're in a 100% virtual model, it has to be about outcomes. And do you have the right people, and are you giving them the right support to deliver on those outcomes? Well, one thing I'm going to end with, if I have 140,000 employees at AT&T, it would be very fascinating to see what the engagement score is over there. But if we look at the Gallup report, would indicate that it's probably less than 30% of those employees are actually engaged in the work they're doing, whether they come to the office 40 hours a week or not, or answer emails at 2 o'clock in the morning or not. Are they engaged in the work they're doing, or are they just doing what's necessary to get by? And I would suspect if that's true and 70% are not engaged, that means 70% of your labor costs are probably, regardless of whether you're tracking them coming into the office, are not delivering. And that's a big cost to the business. So if I was
Well,
going to be thinking about reducing my cost, big chunk of my cost, I'd be looking at how do I improve engagement rather
yep.
than looking at attendance. That's just me.
Well, here, let me sum with this then. So the AT&T did send a question out that said, "Hey, are you guys the policies and systems support me in delivering my best work in this whole return to office mandate?" Over 50% said no. So if you're listening to your employees and you're asking them, "Hey, coming back to the office, this policy and these systems we're giving you, is it helping you do your best work?" And 50% or higher say no. Eh, I would go back and look at do a little bit more number crunch in there
Uh,
moving forward.
Yeah, I think it's that engagement. I mean, think about what the value could be if you could improve what's probably 30%. Let's just take that based on a Gallup report. And I could increase that from 30% to 50% of my team engaged and doing the work that they enjoy doing and delivering on that work, whether it's sales, customer experience, new technology, ripping out copper cable. I mean, that's all what they talked about in the article, that they have to transition from their legacy environment. They've been doing that for 25 years. And also they've got to do it working in a strongly represented environment and all and the challenges that come with that. There's nothing. Nobody said work was going to be easy. Nobody. So I just kind of go, wow, where wouldn't imagine what that would look like. If this is what they can do with 30%, imagine what they could do with 50 or 60% engagement. Hmm. That intrigues me.
Yeah.
So John, if you're listening, I don't know if you remember me, but we worked together at Pacific Bell Information Services. Give me a call. Love to talk about it. All right. With that, at least for me, I think this was a long, but this is a passionate conversation for us. And if you've got comments, we'd love to hear about them. Good, bad, or indifferent. You don't agree with us, we'd love to have that conversation as well. All right, everybody.
Yep. Thanks for listening. And opposite view of Tim here, I don't want to hear any of your comments. I think I'm right, and I don't want to see any viewpoint that
Oh,
would negate that fact.
but
So
that's been the way it's been for the last 9 years that we've known each other.
I'm just
So it's nothing new there.
I'm just getting in character, for the discussion that we just had and saying, nope, I know everything, and just shut up and come to the office, stupid. Stop
I
doing
don't think,
stupid stuff, everybody. That's what
yeah,
we're gonna
stop.
end with. Stop doing
Thank you.
stupid stuff.
Thanks, everybody.